Felicidades, congratulations. It is an amazing honor to be joining you today to celebrate 40 years. 40 years. Think about that for a second. 40 years of resistance, 40 years of saying no, 40 years of organizing, of creating a leaderful, intergenerational movement that is taking control of its land, of its body, of its community, of families, of schools. You've done all that. Starting out with listening to people in the community who were able to say, hey, we're sick. And the reason we're sick is because maybe there is something that exists in my home or something that exists in my community that is making me sick. Being able to identify patterns. And EHC has played a tremendous role in not only setting the stage for what an environmental justice organization that is anchored in community and is truly transformational and leaderful looks like. By making sure that our communities are engaged in community-based planning, that they are engaged in land use and zoning and infrastructure, in the science of the things that are making us ill, that understand NOx, SOx, PM 2.5, PCBs, all the co-pollutants. Think about the language, the complexity, and the disciplines that are involved in making our communities sick, and how our communities have been able to grapple with all of that in the middle of having to deal with displacement, having to deal with underemployment, having to deal with immigration, with police abuse, with all of the things that have been thrown at us and continue to be thrown at us. In the middle of all that, in the middle of families struggling for justice on every level imaginable, the same people who are the descendants of extraction, the descendants of slavery, the descendants of colonialism, the very things that make us more susceptible to disease and have contributed to the fact that we have had to deal with environmental justice, those things, those legacy issues, those people, the descendants of all of that, have been able to change the landscape and pass legislation and literally say no. And so today you get to celebrate 40 years of people honoring their ancestors and saying that they have the power to literally change the air they breathe. That is not a small thing. That's not a small thing, and I think that you have to take this moment to really celebrate that. You know, we sometimes work so hard that we move from one campaign to the other and we have no moment to reflect, to say that, you know, EHC passed the first state ban on lead-contaminated candies and passed one of the first community right-to-know laws in the country. The first municipal general plan in California to include environmental justice goals. You know, these are big things, and these are big things that take a lot of years. And so being able to sustain the work over the years is really very important and not a small thing. But the things also that don't make it to the reports that funders often look at are things like how a life gets changed, how a parent who takes control over the physical conditions in their neighborhood or in their school or in their home transforms them, how they then become leaders in transformation, and how that knowledge then gets passed on to another generation about how toxics and how toxicants can kill someone or can make somebody really sick. That's power. And so these are things that sometimes we take for granted because we go from one campaign to the other. And so the work that EHC has done is not only transformational, it's a model, and it's a model of what environmental justice organizations are doing all over the country. It honors the work that we're doing, and it is something that has not only influenced national policy, but has been shared with other organizations so that we can be better at collecting data and collecting research and understanding the intersection of all these disciplines and how they land in complexity in one community. And so you have to feel good about that. That's 40 years in where you have grown in sophistication, and you understand that we started from fighting against things to building things, right? And so we have pivoted from the environmental justice movement to the climate justice movement, where we're looking at a vision-led unifying place-based set of principles that will build economic and political power and move us away from an extractive economy. That's where we are now, operationalizing renewable energy, moving away from an extractive economy that has basically been the core of how we got here. Literally unlearning colonialism and unlearning everything that we have learned that has gotten us here, right? This condition that we're in, these challenges that we're dealing are the children of capitalism. And so is the conditions that exist in our community. Puerto Rico, for example, and yeah, I'm always going to pivot to Puerto Rico, is an example of what happens to a colony where the United States has had control, where with a history of austerity and neglect, a place where we have been trying to implement this concept of a just transition and a just recovery. It's a tiny island with 23 superfunds that when a Cat 5 hurricane hits, those toxins and those toxicants get literally dispersed into the air, into the land, and into the water, and into the developing lungs of our children. It is the example, I think the poster child of what happens to a people colonized and abused by a country like the United States. But the story is not different than you see in the Gulf South or that you see in communities in LA. The story that has to be told is the story of this organization and how you have come from fighting against environmental racism to fighting for climate justice in a community that has had to take on so many different challenges. So I am just really honored to be with you today and to celebrate with you. I'm sorry that we can't dance and we can't do the kinds of things that traditionally our people do, because you know how we do. But I do want to take a serious moment to talk about where we are right now. You know, right now, the issue of racial justice has become elevated. But the environmental justice movement, the climate justice movement, was always centered on racial justice. Our communities never had the luxury to choose between going to a police misconduct demonstration and one for a right to breathe. In fact, one of the reasons we came into this work was because we were fighting for a right to breathe. So it's really ironic that that is the conversation that we're having right now. Literally our breath has been taken away, or they've attempted to take it away, whether it's in schools, whether it's in our homes, whether it's in our backyards, or whether it's under the knee of a police officer. So we can't separate those two things. Those two things have always gone together. It is what distinguishes us from the climate movement and from the environmental movement, that justice has always been centered. And justice that really lifts the stories of all of our people in all of their beautiful difference. You know, whether they're people who are coming from the Gulf South, whether they're island folks, all of our people have had to deal with this in the countries that we come from. And here in the United States, that's been our history, one of extraction and one of abuse. So are we prepared to deal with COVID? And are we prepared for the extreme weather events that are coming, the extreme heat, the unpredictability of storm surge and wind and all of the things that are heading our way? We've been working on climate adaptation and mitigation and resilience. We're talking about the kind of infrastructure that'll make it possible for us to be able to survive and thrive and create an economy that creates climate jobs. We are doing everything that we need to do so that we can not only survive, but thrive under those conditions. And the other thing that we're doing, which is really amazing, is that we are reclaiming our own traditions as people of the global South, because our people have always lived within their carbon footprint. So those traditions that people don't consider are the traditions that are going to help us live. My grandmother didn't have a formal education. She didn't know how to read or write, but she knew how to work the land. She knew how to repurpose, how to recycle, and how to reuse. And those traditions that are grounded in our traditions and in our people are the traditions that are going to help us build the kind of climate justice movement and are helping us build a movement that is the movement that is going to make it possible for us to get beyond the challenges that are coming our way. I want to thank you. I want to send you blessings from my ancestors to yours, and I want to celebrate you because what you've done, what you've accomplished in these 40 years, Diane, your team, the community, are worth celebrating. I Arche en gracia de corazón.